Why empaths need deep sleep to be resilient. Why do empaths need deep sleep so that they don't suffer from burnout? And that's what we're going to explore today. So my name is Eileen Burns. I'm a soul empowerment coach, healing therapist and a soul line business strategist. But I also spent nearly 25 years, or actually over 25 years, specialising in stress management. I taught stress management, I offered stress counselling, stress coaching and stress therapy. And, one of the things that I saw in my career and in my own personal life, the importance of deep sleep and how much deep, when we don't get into deep quality sleep, how it can impact our health and well-being and our mental and emotional resilience. But one of the things that I noticed also in my own life and many of my clients and students' life was those who were highly sensitive and are empathic, and a lot of the challenges that they could have being light sleepers. So if we explore, and we talk about, first of all, the highly sensitive person. Often empaths are highly sensitive and then they've got that bit of over empathy in them. But if we look at the highly sensitive person, the highly sensitive persons, they have a more finely tuned nervous system, and they tend to process information and notice things on a deeper level. And that impacts them at a different level. So if you think about, it's almost like the system is more finely tuned, right, to notice things and to pick up things. It could be anything. If you think about a hoover and the way that a really good hoover can pick up lots of things that you can't see, well, often sensitives, are a bit like that. So they tend to feel and sense emotions, and not just emotions, but they can pick up things, and they're far more sensitive to a lot of things around them. Now, as a child, I was a bit of a, let's say this, I was the eldest of 9, but my mum would have all sorts of problems with me in relation to sensitivity. I seem to have a lot of kind of allergies and problems, with certain things. And they seem to get worse as I get older, but from a young age, it was apparent that I was lactose intolerant, but also was one of these kids that just wouldn't wear anything that was not naturally cotton or wool, and and I couldn't stand anything that was synthetic. Now, there can be a positive side to that because people are now starting to recognise how toxic a lot of things are, and a lot of fabrics and things that are made, they're not made of natural materials, and how that can lower the vibration. But lots of things that were, not natural, I had a real aversion to. But also, as a highly sensitive person, I just found it really hard to get into a deep sleep, or I found that I would be a very light sleeper, and that I would notice, I'd wake up all sorts of things. I remember, my dad would be up very early, and often my dad would be working away and whatever, and, I could hear him, and it was quite a distance away from the kitchen, from the bedroom and my bedroom, but I could hear him, just taking the pots out the cupboards and things like that. So I had a level of sensitivity in relation to that. So a lot of senses and things I was more sensitive to. Now, there can be gifts out of that because you can sense a lot of things that other people don't notice and see, and it helped me in lots of areas. I became very creative when I was younger, and I had an eye for things, and I kind of noticed patterns, and I could understand people a lot better. And particularly being very highly empathic, I would recognise other people's emotions and pain. The problem I had, like most empaths, is I had unhealthy boundaries, and I would take on the pain and over-identify with other people's trauma to a very unhealthy degree. Now, if you mix that combination together, that can cause a lot of anxiety and stress to the nervous system. It can expose you to, a lot more drama, other people's drama, but also when particularly you're highly empathic and it's very unhealthy. I would call myself an unruly empath. And I remember when a healer described me as that, I thought, that's the perfect word. It was so, the empathy was so out of control that I didn't really I couldn't really identify what was mine and what was other people's problems and challenges, and I found it hard to put myself first. I wasn't very assertive. Now, if you think about that is the kind of everyday challenges that many empaths face, and even sensitives, until they start addressing issues that are causing some of these things. If you think about, even, kids that are, neurodivergent are on certain aspects of the spectrum where they have a level of hypersensitivity, and certain things can really kind of aggravate the nervous system or be more stimulating. The challenge is that to achieve, good quality sleep, you have to reach, deep stages of relaxation. And this is one of the things that, and I know, and I've taught this for many years, is that the importance of when you're managing anxiety or stress, or even sleep, or even pain issues, you have to look at being able to address the overstimulation, right? That's part and parcel. But if you can't get quality sleep, it becomes a big vicious circle, because the nervous system, to be able to regulate, to get back in to a state of harmony, a state of balance and beingness, needs to achieve the 5 stages of deep sleep. Go through the 5 stages, the sleep cycles, to achieve that deep quality sleep. And if you mix in a lot of other things that can happen, then, sometimes you have a lot of combinations. I know through the years I had lots of things happen to me that certainly would not have helped my quality sleep. And that included mercury toxicity, a mercury problem, which really played havoc on my body. And then all sorts of cranial and other conditions that could cause me pain. And it's like the chicken and the egg scenario. What caused what first, right? And just to give you kind of a little background, this is just my example, but everyone's unique. When I was very young, I was only weeks old, I was accidentally dropped down a stair, right? And there's a long story about it. My parents didn't find out to basically till I was about 21. And it's a long story, but basically it was a doctor then found a letter, and it wasn't my mum and dad's address, it was a grandparent's address. And they obviously did not want to distress my parents and say, but they'd actually took me for an x-ray at the time, right? But I developed, as a young kid, a lot of cranial conditions, and a rare condition impacted the structure of my face. But I also had rare eye complications. So I had a lot of things went on. And, I am now, I'll be 57 in August. I'm doing this video, we're in April 2026. And interestingly, it wasn't till last year I discovered something else going on with the skull. Very interesting, something else, my C1 and C2 was out, but also I had an elongated styloid, which is basically a large bone from here down into my neck, which is known for causing all sorts of complications, and had all the symptoms of, one of the most complicated aspects of that, and that's a whole new other story, and I will be sharing more about this as I go on. But all these factors, sometimes our health, our well-being, our structure, being out of alignment, anyone who is into body work, right, anyone who works with the body and the structures understands how much the body structures, the fascia, the ability for the body to be able to hold its core and, to stay stabilised. A lot of these things can influence the balance in our body, and if you have a lot of things happen, all these things can impact your nervous system. It's the same as, we suffer all sorts of trauma and challenging situations in our life. We all carry different types of baggage, right? And they can impact us mentally, emotionally, physically, even spiritually, and of course, from a physical perspective, the structural aspect. And one of the things that I noticed when I got some help with this one aspect of the structural issue, unfortunately I have to wait for some help, and another way it looks like if I need surgery, even though it's something that I would avoid at all costs, to remove this huge bone that shouldn't really be there. But when I went to the top chiropractics, I think that's what it's called, in Edinburgh, which is a great service, which is they treat you upper cervical chiropractic, which is very gentle. I couldn't believe the difference in my sleep in some levels right now. I ended up, because there was something else going on, I had some other problems. And it's like, sometimes when we start to do something that heals the body and benefits the body, we can have other complications. So I had some other complications that did impact my sleep, to do with choking, to do with the bone. But other than that, my whole nervous system, I couldn't believe after even just the first manipulation, how much my nervous system, my energetic field shifted. And, this is an example of where, other being empath, our empathy or sensitivity is looking at all the other factors that can be influencing our sleep, that can be having an impact. It's the same as, if you're perimenopause or you're in menopause and you have certain symptoms. Now, there's a whole hormonal shift that happens, when you get into menopause and you're moving into perimenopause and then getting into menopause. And, that's why women, there's lots of things that happen where it's almost like the stress hormones. The easiest way to explain is like a lot of stress hormones kind of take over because you're depleted in other areas. And if you already have hormonal imbalances, or you've got other things going on, you've maybe had chronic inflammation or other challenges, and you're maybe already even energetically sensitive, some of those fluctuations can make a huge difference. A lot of people talk about the psychological, but there's some of us, like, I'm a healer and I never really ever thought about the menopause too much, even though I've done it in my work. And I've never made it a priority, because I spent a lot of my life with a lot of challenges that, to me, it was just something else. But one of the things that, is one of the biggest challenges when, women get through these stages, they notice a big difference. Many of them notice a huge difference in the quality of their sleep. And, if you're holistic and you don't want to get down the prescription route, obviously you want to do things as natural as possible, is what I try and choose to do, is that you want to look for, holistic approaches. And this is why it's really important to identify what actually is going on. Now, I know I had started having dramatic sleep issues, but I had horrendous skull pain, and nobody was listening to me. But, when you have certain things, you have to, first of all, be an advocate for yourself, which can be really challenging. So, you have to be an advocate for certain things that are going on that need to be addressed, right? And if we don't, if we don't get good quality sleep, it impacts almost every aspect of our life. Our cognitive ability declines. And if you look at even menopause, a lot of people, really suffer brain fog. Now, I've had brain fog quite a large part of my life, so I understand what that is. So that was never something new. But if you've got other things going on, you've already got a chronic health condition, and then you add some of these things to the mix, it can really, it depletes you. Your body is not working in balance. Your body is not fully restoring and repairing itself. And, when you don't get deep sleep, you don't feel as grounded and centered. You're more high-wired. And it's a vicious cycle, because the more that you are overtired, the more you get that kind of, high-wired feeling that you're exhausted, but you feel wired. Now, as a sensitive and empath, it's funny, my closest friends, those that know really me well, will notice, and I would say the ones that really know me well would point out to me when I'm getting a bit high-wired, because if I'm overstimulated, even though I'm doing, oh my goodness, 100 times better, which I'm so grateful for Ryan, at this clinic, but one of the things that people would notice, I would start to talk faster, or I would get, so it's that overstimulation. And the challenge is, when you're very empathic, we can go both ways. I mean, people, naturally want to retrieve, and because they have to have that rest time, they have to withdraw and take the time to rest, because they can't, they don't have the same resilience against the world as other people, because they're picking up far more in the energy field, far more. It's like their nervous system is so almost finely tuned that they're picking up far more than anyone else. So they need to kind of how could you say, release that and get back into your centre. Now, along the empath and the sensitive journey, we all have different learnings, and we can have different challenges, right? And then obviously sometimes we master certain things and we're better at things, but then situations in life can get in the way, and we can go through all sorts of things like grief or loss or other difficult challenges that can play an impact. And all these things can, really influence our sleep and the ability to get deep rest. And it's particularly when we think about a young mother. And even though the hormones in the body are kind of designed a little bit to cope with that, it's very exhausting if, someone's not getting enough sleep. They're constantly burnt out. And the reality is, a burnt out empath or a burnt out highly sensitive person is not good, right? No one is good, being burnt out is not good for anyone. But the problem is, it's almost like the empath and sensitive just doesn't have that same resilience energetically if they don't have the healthy boundaries, and if their nervous system is more sensitive, right? So they're more likely to have like an over response. And that's why you see so many empaths and sensitive that end up with all sorts of health challenges. You see a lot of empaths and sensitives with things like chronic fatigue type things, or immune disorders and things like that. Now, I'm not saying it's the whole picture. I'm definitely not saying it's the whole picture, because I think there's a lot of people who would, make out a lot of things are only the cause of this. And I think that can be very dangerous, and it's very naive, and it's not always being completely truthful about the whole picture, right? And I think there's, again, it's the chicken and the egg scenario. There's lots of factors that can play a part in, different things about our childhood, or things about how we think we need to show up or become in the world. Of course, all these factors play a part. Our environment, what happens to us, all the different things that we can deal with, and mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and in our environment. But deep sleep, when you have deep sleep, you just feel so much better. You feel like yourself, right? You feel, because you're more energetically in your body. And one of the biggest challenges with many empaths is that because they over-identify with other people's pain, and they often pick up other people's energy and pain. I know, for example, even as a healer, when I did work, I had to really protect my energy a lot, and a lot of things, and watch, particularly I come from a big family, been in an environment, big environments, where a lot of people's energy could be so overwhelming, and it became an even bigger problem for me after I had a period of sepsis where I was in intensive care. Now, I have a variety of reasons why I think it happened, but that's a whole other story. But what happened was, it was almost everything was dialed up 600%, and it became really challenging. Now, I do think part of the structural issues that I had was part of the problem as well, because I certainly, a lot of that feels, more kind of normalised, or as normalised as it, that I've ever felt. But what I would say is that, deep restful sleep is vital for us to be able to move off the stress response into the relaxed response. Deep restful sleep is vital for the repair of the body. Now, when I was only 21, I was diagnosed as having ME. Now, I would end up in my 20s spending a large part of what you would class housebound and bedbound. I was so ill, and at times, the slightest exertion could send me back. But as again, I had a lot of things happened. I had never really quite recovered from the incident with the mercury. It was never addressed, and I tried to fight against it, right? And I didn't really understand my level of empathy and sensitivity, but one of the things that I knew that I experienced was I was never, no matter how many hours I slept, I didn't feel as if I got a deep quality sleep. And it was so shocking, and I suffered such extreme exhaustion that at times I would sleep up to 20 hours a day, and that I needed that to actually even function, to be able to do basic things. And sometimes I was so weak, I would struggle to hold a cup. A cup would actually be really heavy, the level of weakness. And it taught me a lot of things, and it made me look at things from a whole different perspective. And one of the things that I, recognised was there was something going on with sleep. And I had to come to terms that, throughout my life, that a lot of people didn't understand that. And, there wasn't always the right answers, but also there wasn't always the right questions. And I discovered along that path, a lot of people would put their projections onto you of what the cause was and all the different factors, but often there was a lot of different things, right? But the reality is that I never, I only felt really well when I got good quality sleep. And one of the things I remember, when I was really, really ill, my parents had been looking after me, but I actually went and, moved out because I was still in a family home where there was a lot of noise, and I just couldn't get the rest that I needed, and that was important. So deep sleep is important, and it's not, people focus often just about the amount of sleep. You can sleep for hours, but if you're not getting deep quality sleep, you're not getting that repair, you're not getting that restoration. So it's not, people are so focused on the amount of sleep, but if you don't feel rested and you're not getting into deep stages of sleep, well, your nervous system doesn't have that support. When you're highly empathic and highly sensitive, you need to be able to achieve that deep rest, achieve that deep sleep, right? And, it's one of the most important things that I taught in stress management, and helping people get into the relaxed response, and if it is an area of problems, reach out to me. But to help you, I have created a free download, Understanding the 5 stages of better sleep. And it goes through, just, some aspect of different things that can influence your sleep, and, and maybe different natural holistic approaches that you can use to address that. But it also explains the 5 stages and what they are, and why there are certain stages that we're more likely to wake up, or, not get into deeply enough, okay? And I think it's really, really important that, see right now what's going on in the world. There are so many factors that can make you feel more anxious, more stressed, more uncertain, more ungrounded. And if you can make getting a good night's sleep a big focus, it can make a huge difference, right? We all know what it feels like, if you've got a big decision to make or something, not nice has happened, and, going for a sleep and waking up the next day refreshed and restored can make a huge difference. But if you're not waking up refreshed and restored, that is going to impact your mental and emotional well-being and your ability to be, more energetic, resilient. So remember how important it is. And, sometimes what happens when someone else is not an empath or a sensitive, or they think they are, and they're not really, they don't have the same challenges that you have. They don't quite understand, and they don't understand when you maybe sleeping a lot longer, or you're feeling unrested, because they're not experiencing that. It's just like everything I've learned through a lot of the challenges that I have, that a lot of people make lots of assumptions and don't always listen, and make, assumptions, or, they get the wrong end of something. The key here is it's about basic self-care. And it's so important right now, getting the basics right, self-care, and doing what is really important to you. You have to, a lot of times, one of the hardest things for me was to, do a lot of things that people didn't understand and that were necessary for me, right? And getting deep sleep is necessary, and other people might not understand the challenges. You have to do what is right for you to get the rest and the sleep, okay? And as I said, this download shares a lot of different holistic approaches. I've got lots of other blogs about sleep, and I will put a few of those underneath the video, okay? So deep sleep is really, really important, and it's really important for our resilience, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And that's another story. I'll talk about that in another video. Have a wonderful day. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and sign up for my freebie. Okay, bye bye.